morning. My name is Kelly Close. I'm editor-in-chief of Diatribe, a free online newsletter for people with diabetes and their families, and president of Close Concerns, Inc., which is a healthcare information firm exclusively devoted to diabetes and obesity. So thrilled to be here this year at Friends for Life. I hope you share in my excitement. I really know that everybody in this room does, and we welcome everyone that's joining us from the online community virtually. Before we kick off our discussion, on behalf of the Partnering for Diabetes Change Coalition, I just want to take a minute to thank Children with Diabetes, Jeff Hitchcock, Johnson & Johnson for all the work they do and all of the support they provide. Children with Diabetes is just one of the many amazing members of the diabetes online community, which serves as an invaluable resource for so many of us. And speaking of the diabetes online community, that's what we're here to talk about today, to talk about its role in diabetes management. So let's start with some quick facts about the DOC. Diabetes is now the 5th most popular search term among all healthcare conditions. Thousands of blogs are dedicated to living with diabetes. And I know many of us here can remember when there were just dozens of blogs or just very, very few blogs, especially Korey. I remember when I first saw her blog, and I think it was literally like maybe one of 10 of them out there. So now there are thousands that provide so much to so many of us. There are 230,000 Facebook members who list diabetes as an area of interest. And we know that it is really a lot more than that, of course. More than 76 million people with diabetes worldwide will be online by 2014. So people with diabetes spend more than 20% of their time online and on social networks. So let's put this into perspective. Can anybody guess what the 0.1% sliver represents in this circle? May or may not surprise you to know that as a point of comparison, people with diabetes only spend about 0.1% of their time with medical professionals per year. That's significantly less time than they spend online, with family, with peers, and on their own. Diabetes is very much a condition we have to manage on our own. So peer support from the diabetes online community can make a huge difference. Take the Friends for Life conference, just as one example. We know how valuable this meeting is for adults with diabetes, for children with diabetes, for families, for parents, for grandparents, or we wouldn't be here. It's an amazing in-person event. But we know that not everyone can fly to Florida once a year, and that's why our ability to extend this type of experience and this sense of community virtually is so incredibly important. And that's why we're so excited to be here today. Over the last few months, several of us from the DOC have been working closely with Johnson & Johnson to address unmet needs in diabetes through community and collaboration. Through our work, we seek to validate the role of peer support in diabetes management, address the stigma of diabetes, and ultimately support underserved communities. The aim of this panel discussion is to bring together experts in the diabetes arena and take the first step in showcasing the important role online engagement plays in patient health and diabetes management. For those of you joining us virtually, don't forget to tweet your questions. Toward the end of the session today, we'll invite our audience members here to ask their burning questions, and throughout the session, we'll field questions via Twitter using the P4DC hashtag from those watching via the live stream. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Jeremy Pettus to introduce himself, and then the rest of our distinguished panel will introduce themselves. We've got Bennett Dunlap, Adam Brown, and Carrie Sparling, who are going to be looking at what you're all doing on Twitter. Bennett's going to be moderating, and we invite lots of audience participation. Over to you, Jeremy. Okay.
So I'm Dr. Jeremy Pettus. I work at the University of California, San Diego. I see patients in the endocrinology department there, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. I also work with a not-for-profit organization called Taking Control of Your Diabetes, which is an adult patient education program, and I head up their type 1 education track. So that's my background. Oh, and I'm also wearing the green bracelet because I'm type 1 myself. There we go.
I am Korey Hood. I'm a clinical psychologist and associate professor at University of California, San Francisco. So we've got the West Coast covered. And my work focuses on applying behavioral interventions to patients with diabetes and their families toward the end of improving outcomes as well as improving quality of life. I also see patients clinically for individual and family and couples therapy. I also have type 1 diabetes myself.
I'm Barbara Anderson. I'm a pediatric psychologist and professor of pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston. So I've got the Gulf Coast covered. We like to call ourselves the Third Coast. I do research with families, and I have a real interest in mentoring and have the good fortune now to have a mentoring award, and so I'm being able to focus on training up a new generation of behavioral researchers in type 1 diabetes.
Hi, I'm Jill Weissberg-Benchell. I'm a pediatric psychologist. I work at a children's hospital in Chicago. I'm also a certified diabetes educator, and I do both clinical work with children, teenagers, and their families, and I also do research aimed at improving communication and family teamwork and coping and adapting with diabetes. I am an orange bracelet person.
Thanks, Jill, Barbara, Korey, and Jeremy. It's a real privilege to be here. I'm a huge fan of Friends for Life, and I think it's a thrill to be able to take this experience and share it with people who can't be here physically. It's just a real honor to do that. And it's a privilege to be here with some of the best minds in behavioral diabetes care in the country, if not the world. So thank you guys for coming. My role is to ask a couple of questions. I know my friends here on the panel are going to have questions, and if we get questions from the audience, I think there's cards you can pass up, and or if you're online on Twitter, you can use the hashtag that was previously mentioned. So to get started, I think it's a good idea to talk about social media, because the term means something different to just about everybody you talk to. There's one component that's really important, I think, in the definition of social media, and that is the two-way communication, that there's an opportunity for people to comment, to respond, to engage in a discussion. So to keep our discussion on track today, we're going to limit the definition of social media to mean blogs, Twitter, and forums, and we're going to do that just so that we don't get tied up in definitions of what we mean by social media. So with that said, I think our first question for you guys today is, how do you think healthcare professionals feel about diabetes social media as a resource for patients? And I'll just let you guys work your way through who's going to speak when.
You want me to? I can jump in first. So in terms of, I think, how healthcare professionals view the DOC, I think that there's mixed feelings about it. I think that some can see the value in it and see it as an extra resource, and others are a little bit worried about the information that individuals can take from the online community and whether it's going to be accurate and consistent with some of their recommendations. So I think there's some mixed emotions, but as Kelly pointed out, the amount of time that's spent with healthcare professionals across a year for people with diabetes is so small that there's a huge gap that needs to be filled, and I think the online community can do that. And so part of what we're going to talk about today, I'm sure, is how we can get healthcare professionals a little bit further along in their appreciation and acceptance of it.
I've seen that the site makes a big difference. There certainly are well-recognized sites like Children with Diabetes, like Planet D of ADA, like Juvenation for JDRF. The Joslin Diabetes Center has a great monitored forum. That these sites that are monitored are really trusted, and professionals do refer patients and families to them. I think where the fear or the monster under the bed comes in is the unmonitored, especially forums that like to sneak in ads about vitamins which may help your insulin work better and things like that, and potential cures. But I think the monitored sites, most healthcare providers who have open minds are quite in favor of them. I know at our hospital we refer all our newly diagnosed families to childrenwithdiabetes.com.
Yeah, I guess I would agree with a lot of what's been said already. I think the term social media, I'm glad that you defined it, because I think it has, a lot of different definitions and means a lot of different things to different people. I think if you ask most healthcare professionals, how do you feel about sending your patients online to get information about diabetes, they would all say, oh, that's a good idea, that's fantastic. If you ask, how do you feel about social media for your patients, they would probably kind of back up a little bit, because there is a little bit of fear. And I think I totally agree with that, with what you were saying, that the regulated sites are the ones that are the most trusted, because we've all gone onto blogs and seen people kind of changing back and forth information about, healthcare practice that can be dangerous. So I think that's the real concern from a physician's standpoint, is that as soon as you have that back and forth, you lose the control over what's going to be said to your particular patient. That's one issue.
Yes, but I don't think that matters in some ways, because social media is here to stay. And it's an amazing opportunity to meet with people that have the exact same experience that you've had, who get it at a level that your family, no matter how much they love you, can't get. And so I think that in so many ways that fear is misplaced, that the healthcare professional fear, because you get this sense of community that is impossible to get at your doctor's office. And some great advice about some really personal experiences, I think, sometimes that many people are very embarrassed to ask their healthcare professionals, but would be much more comfortable reaching out to people that live the same illness every day. So I think that a lot of the fear is misplaced and misguided. There's only one research study I've seen that actually looked at inaccurate recommendations for healthcare on websites, and it was only 3% of all the posts. So that's 97% of greatness, right? So I think that we're afraid of very little things. And if it's a well-moderated site, then if you see something that somebody posts on your site and you can take it down, that's great.
So you've all expressed something. Oh, and bonus points, by the way, for getting the monster under the bed in there and the answer that. I think that we owe you a cocktail at cocktail hour tonight or something for being the first person to work that into an answer. But you talked about a level of comfort, and I'm curious if you have any suggestions for people that participate in social media or blog or tweet or whatever, about how they can behave and how we can make our community more trustworthy in the eyes of medical professionals.
Well, I think Jill made a good point about people living with diabetes going to the internet for support, not for information. And I think that may be the dimension that many healthcare providers overlook. Most of the families that I know are not going to find out the definition of a beta cell or what the latest, vaccine is all about. They're looking for support and connection in real time. And I know in Houston we have a very active Yahoo group of 450 parents that it's just a fabulous online community. And what I've been impressed with is that they can respond to each other in real time. So it doesn't have this, it's really like a dialogue. So not only is it support, but it's a dialogue. There's really two kinds of support. There's emotional support and instrumental support, or giving people help about things. And on this website, now that it's summer in Houston and everybody's sweating, and how do you keep your pump on, and what tape do you use to keep the sensor on the best? There's all this instrumental support being shared, as well as how do you get your kid to wear the thing in the first place? A lot of emotional support. So I think if physicians especially, and most nurses get it, that it's the support dimension that really I think is the most valuable to people living with diabetes.
And that's really I don't think that's what the healthcare professionals, that's not their role. The role is, which I think is filled by the online community and social media, is to provide support. And there are a number of research studies, and Jill mentioned the one, but there are a number of studies that talk about at least equivalence between people doing interventions, behavioral interventions or talk therapy, over Skype and in person. And there's a lot of equivalence. You don't lose something by having it to have to be face-to-face. And so I think that there's certainly a lot of promise and potential there that that maybe getting providers that information and doing some of these things in the real world would probably help.
One follow-up on that. So I think with social media, we often hear like 1% sort of contribute and 99% sort of lurk in the background, or 10% contribute and 90% kind of lurk. I'm wondering, from a perspective of a healthcare provider or from patients, how do we get kind of unengaged patients or mildly engaged patients like really on social media? And do you think that that's something we can move the needle on a patient side, like getting people more comfortable with being on social media, or can healthcare providers sort of help kind of patients that aren't that engaged get more into social media, or how do you kind of feel about that?
I think that I'm not actually sure how to answer that question, but I'll say maybe something that's relevant a little bit. I think that one of the beauties of social media is that you have people there that cheerlead for you and say, I'm going to hold you accountable. You said that you were going to check one more time a day. Did you check? Did you check that one more time? And so you have these people that are there to sort of support you and guide you and cheer you on and say, yeah, you really do need to go to that eye doctor visit, and we believe in you, and you can do it, and it's not that scary because I already did it. And so I think it's that support, it's that emotional support, the cheerleading, the I believe in you, I've been there, I understand. That's the motivating piece, is that there are people that are there to hold your hand, not because they want to judge you, but because they really want to partner with you. So I think one of the things that social media does is it levels the playing field, and it's a less of a hierarchical relationship, which I think in many ways is the nature of a healthcare professional to patient engagement. So I think that will keep people more engaged, but how you get people to actually access and actually get online the first time, that I'm not sure about, except that it's just going to happen more and more because everybody's just doing it more and more.
I think time. You know, just like with the adoption of anything new, there's different developmental rates that people have. In this online community in Houston that was started by Kimberly Robertshaw, which is just fabulous, I've seen posts from a mother who'll say, I haven't said anything in 2 years, but I just have to say this. You know, so people that someone will write a story about something that's very sad in their life, and somebody will pop up and say, I haven't said anything before, but I just want you to know that happened in my family, and here's some steps we took to try to get ourselves in balance. So I think it happens in a different rate for people. I'm not sure that there's any way that any of us should go rounding up, like a rodeo, round up these people that aren't on the internet yet. I think everybody will in their own time when it's right for them.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say that that's one good thing about social media, is that you don't have to actively contribute. You know, you might not feel obliged to ask that question, but maybe somebody else has asked it, and you benefit from the conversation even though you're not quote-unquote engaged. You know, there's a lot of people on Facebook, for example, my wife, who doesn't post much, but she's the one that's always on there keeping me informed about what's going on and these kinds of things. And when something important comes up, you know, she will post or this kind of thing. So, you know, different people have different thresholds for how active they're going to be, but the whole gamut can benefit from the conversation that's taking place.
And you've taken to that point, you've taken the lurkers from sitting in the crowd and not having any idea what's going on, but you've at least taken them into the game. They're at least on the bench now. And so I think there's an acceptance of the lurkers, and they're getting information that way, which they didn't have the access to that before.
And for the caregivers or the loved ones of people with diabetes, if you're a lurker, I think that it also can help you have a renewed sense of awe for everything that the person with diabetes is doing every day that you might not have understood quite if you only talked to your own family member. But hearing it from other people, I think, is a great benefit for the family members.
Sorry, I'm all the way down here, sorry. So there's like a Me Too philosophy for people who are online and sharing their diabetes stories. So we feel better hearing from other people who live with it. We can say Me Too. But in the healthcare sphere, do you guys as healthcare professionals feel like you need to get the Me Too from your community so that you feel comfortable jumping into the social media space? Does there need to be something that can help kind of bring the HCPs together so that you also feel uncomfortable?
I think there's probably a lot of individual differences in that. I am what I call a stealth member of this big online community in Houston because when I first joined, a lot of the conversation had to do with criticism of the hospital and certain providers where I work. Well, this kind of venting and connection needs to happen. And if Barbara stood up as a Texas Children's Hospital professor and said, well, now, wait a minute, give us a break here. We had 800 patients scheduled that day. You know, I didn't want to be in that kind of communion. So I basically feel like it's my job to I feel like kind of a stealth person. I look for safety issues. I've only once called up the head of a hospital when we had a mother of a newly diagnosed 19-month-old who reported to the online community that her minister had cured her daughter, and in fact they'd taken her off of insulin all weekend and she was just fine. So I made some calls to find out which hospital had a recently diagnosed 19-month-old girl and was able to get that doctor and that team onto that mother and, you know, help support her through this terrible misconception. But that's the only kind of time that I would act. So I think just like patients are very different, I think, you know, when you're seeing therapy, when I was a therapist at Joslin for so many years, of course there wasn't social media then, but I wouldn't have wanted to be on Facebook friending my patients or, you know, that's a boundary issue for a psychologist. So I think it's probably different for everybody.
Yeah, I think there are only a certain number of providers who I think can say the Me Too side of it and say it, you know, genuinely. But it's also, I think, the ones who can connect with the patient and say, you know what, this is hard. Let's work together and figure out how we can make this work better. Those are the ones who I think are already telling people to go to the online community and to use social media. So it's the other group that I think is harder to change. And we know, you know, anytime there's some new medical practice or something that's evidence-based that we try and put it into practice, it takes years and years to do that. So changing provider behavior is really hard. So I think that the Me Too part, if you can't get providers to connect with patients already, you're not going to get them to that end. And so I think that this community has to serve its own purpose.
Yeah, I think the medicine community in general tends to be slower to adapt kind of new ways, I guess. And this extends to just technology, I think, in general for diabetes. The way that we download pump information and meter information, it needs to be just brought into the modern age. You know, and the same thing goes with social media. It's like you were saying, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So the question is not whether to use it or whether not to use it. It's how to use it safely and effectively. And starting to, you know, I don't know where this movement's going to come from. Maybe, you know, this panel or people like this that are, you know, innovative thinking of, yes, social media is here. Here's some sites that I trust, and this is the reason why I trust them, so I can start recommending them to patients and to other providers. So I think there definitely will be a movement from patients bringing this to their providers, like, hey, I heard about this site or that, what do you think? And then also from colleagues, you know, what sites do you recommend or why? You know, we have a handout that we give patients of certain sites that we trust and talk to them about those sites. And different patients have different needs. You know, there's a very different site you would recommend for a parent of a child with type 1 versus a newly diagnosed type 2. So it's also about individualizing that form of social media. So, I don't know.
And just to follow up, we've often wondered like what it will take to sort of prove the clinical value of social media. So how do you do you see like a clinical study being carried out that could kind of make that happen, or do you think that's not really necessary? Kind of to sort of validate it in the eyes of providers.
That would be really hard to do. I'm trying to think. I'm putting on my researcher hat. How do you do sort of a well-controlled, randomized clinical trial, right, that you could publish with statistics? So that would be really, really hard to do because you'd have to take people that have never accessed social media in any way and then introduce them to it and see what happens. And then you'd have to have people that have accessed it for a while and see what happens and compare the group. That would be a really tough study to do.
And it might be just taking what's already out there. I mean, pieces of data that's already out there that we know, when people connect with others or they feel supported, they feel engaged, those are the times that they do better with disease management. And so it's maybe taking what's already out there and putting it together in some kind of new way that will bolster it. But I think about it a little bit like I think about diabetes camps. And, diabetes camps have been going on forever. But we don't really know why and how well they work, because there's something, if you ask each individual camper and the folks that run the camps, there's something magical that happens that we can't exactly measure, that we can't put a value on. And I think to some extent it's a little bit like that with social media and the online community, that there's some important magic that happens that maybe we just can't measure real well. And that doesn't sit well with many of the kind of regulators of recommendations, but that's what it is.
Well, and it's a shared experience. I don't know how to measure the fact that I am the same as everybody else and we're all sharing something in real time together at that moment, and that I'm not different. It's an incredibly powerful experience that I don't know how to measure.
So, and speaking of magic, we have a question from Dr. Bob in the audience, so go ahead.
Sort of a comment, and actually a couple comments. So, from the practitioner side, physicians, healthcare providers, we struggle with that 1% time too. It's very, very difficult to make any substantial impact on anybody's life in that 1% of time during the year. So, Jeremy, to your point, I think the key is engaging physicians, practitioners with the right sites, monitored sites, give them the ability to get CWD and other sites to their patients, feeling confident that it's not just a place where they can get the social support, but their questions answered. Because when you have that 1%, the patients aren't coming to you with web clippings about what they need for support. They're coming at you, as Barbara said, with, will this vitamin or this supplement help me? So I think that that's important. And then the other comment was to the research available through sites like this. I mean, there's tremendous opportunity for research in this. And, the site, some of you may know about, Patients Like Me, really does an unbelievable job at extracting data from, just, a social media perspective of people entering their own experience. So I think that it's something that really would be very helpful.
I wanted to jump in and just say that I do think that if you're looking for acceptance or validation from the scientific community, that you do have to do that study. And like Jill said, exactly how you do it isn't entirely clear. But I don't know that that's what you need to do, is seek acceptance and validation from the scientific community. So,
yeah, I would just say I totally agree with your comment. I think there's a perception of patients of what they get from coming to their doctor versus the online community, and those are completely separate. I go to my doctor to get my meds refilled and talk about my glucose patterns and my blood pressure and cholesterol and these kinds of things. And a lot of patients, I imagine, don't even consider bringing up the idea of social media or these kinds of things. It's completely separate. So one is we don't have a lot of time to talk about that, and two, I think there is that kind of gap. So quick, effective ways, handouts, something that support staff can do of, you have type 1 diabetes, you're checking out, by the way, here's some information, or something to help just kind of fill that 99.9% of the year where they're not seeing us.
So we have a question from Kelly Rawlings, who's asked, because it kind of comes along with like what sites would you recommend, what makes you recommend a site. So she's asking what features of social media communities are important for trust so that you guys as HCPs would recommend them. So you can even do like a top 3 of the things that you're looking for in a site if you want to kind of pass it on to your patients.
I think moderated sites, which don't have to be moderated by healthcare providers. The one in Houston is moderated by the people. It's a self-monitored site. It's fabulous. They're right on target all the time. So I think monitoring would certainly be number one on my list. And two would be some culture of boundaries, of not overgiving personal information, so that we didn't have people putting information out there that could be misused. People that don't have a sense of boundaries, maybe, especially young people. But I think other than those two, I can't think of any other criteria for me.
I don't want to see ads for different kinds of products that are not vetted. Once I see that, I probably won't trust the site.
I think it's that.
What would be an example?
Oh, like Gila Monster juice, that cures, right? And once I would see that, I would be like, yeah, I'm not going to, continue. So, that would be something that would just make me think, no, I really don't want to send my families that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think the real monster under the bed, Bennett, if I can get my cocktail later, is the unmonitored sites. Because, if we're really talking about what I fear as a healthcare professional is going on and seeing those comments where, a type 2 is telling a type 1 they can come off insulin and these kinds of things. And it doesn't happen that often, but it definitely happens. And when I see that kind of thing, it just freaks me out. So I want to have some kind of monitor process of seeing exchange of specific health-related information that can be dangerous to a patient, and some kind of overseer, whether that's a healthcare professional or something, that can either take those comments out or at least respond to it, to keep things kind of on the up and up. And a lot of this also comes from just time and reputation of sites that have been around for a long time. And it's tough if you're just Googling to know the reputation of a site. So I guess asking your healthcare team, I would make a pitch for that, doctors and nurses are becoming more aware of what sites are good to go to. So definitely asking them about which sites have a good reputation.
I think that, and the time limiting part of it is that, for me, I want to have seen this site. I would like to, and we can't possibly view all of the sites and validate them ourselves. And maybe I don't think that's our job. But that's the part that I think holds providers from recommending certain sites as much as time constraints, is just that they haven't viewed them themselves. And they feel like, I'm not going to make a recommendation about something unless I've looked at it.
Just as a follow-up, you've mentioned moderated sites several times. Moderated by who, though, in your opinion? I mean, is it a doctor that needs to be vetting this information? Is it an educated patient? Could it just be the community self-policing itself? Like, who do you think needs to be behind the wheel as far as that goes?
I like deregulation and self-policing. I think that's not politically. I'm not. Anyway, yeah, exactly. I think I have to speak to my lawyer now. No, but
Korey, that is a red lanyard.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I do think that it's important that you don't. There's got to be some maybe committee that is made up of individuals in the online community, maybe some healthcare professionals, maybe even someone from industry that together can look at the array of what's available and say, we vetted this, we think this is important. And so maybe the day-to-day moderation of it isn't important, but someone putting their stamp on it. And I think it needs to be from the community.
And just as a follow-up, do you see a role from, say, the ADA or AADE kind of putting a stamp of approval on, we think these sites are moderated? Because if there is a big problem with HCPs not having enough time to view these sites, maybe there's a role to play there? Or, Jill, I see you shaking your head no.
I just am thinking that they're so conservative.
Yeah.
And so, meaning, that there's a huge delay in taking up new ideas. And that's their job, right, is to be conservative in that way. I'm not sure that that's the job of social media. So I'm not sure that that would be a good match.
I think it would be very difficult to get that stamp of approval to get the ADA on board. But say that you waved your magic wand and you could have a site or two that was ADA approved. I think for the general healthcare professional, that would help, because there is a lot of fear that I don't want to recommend a site to my patient. They go out and get some information, they get harmed, it comes back, it looks bad on me. At least if I have some form of regulation that this is an okay thing to do, I think it would help. I don't know if that's the answer, but it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, I totally agree with both points. I think it would help to have that, but if you want to start that process now, in about 10 years, you could have a stamp. I mean, I think it's just, if you want to slow things down, involve academics and large organizations.
Right. And one of the most powerful things about the social media and the online community is its fluidity. It changes. So a rubber stamp on something that's constantly moving, it's like you never put your foot in the same stream twice. I would be highly suspicious of stamps of approval on things that are organic and change. Certainly I've seen, there's a relatively new site some of you may know called Glue, G-L-U. Now that site has started up and they've changed tremendously due to feedback on the part of the participants in this new online community. So it's changed. Just in the year, it's funded by the Helmsley Foundation and Type 1 Diabetes Exchange. It's just, it's changing every day in response to feedback. So I'm not sure stamps of approval would, I agree with Korey, it'd slow things down.
I was going to say one other thing, though, is it's not just healthcare professionals that are worried about what information their patients might get on social media. I work with very conservative clinicians, and they're worried about what their families learn at camp. They're worried about what their families learn when they come here. And one of the people that I work with says, every time I have somebody that goes to Friends for Life, they come back wanting a pump. Great! I think that there are healthcare professionals who are really interested in keeping up with the research and partnering with families, regardless of where they access the information, because it's a true partnership, right, and a shared experience. And then there are others that have much more of a formal, hierarchical relationship where I'm the paternalistic healthcare professional that tells you what you need to do. Now go do what I told you. I don't know if social media or anything is going to change that outside of the revamping of education for healthcare professionals, right? So if we're going to worry about that, I think it's a worry. We're not going to affect change in that.
So I'm going to be the formal patriarchal moderator here. See, we have a question in the back.
I just have a question. As being medical professionals, how apprehensive are you to jump into a discussion online as far as liability with your professional credentials or being a person with diabetes? And do we need to sort of knock down those walls a little bit, because medical professionals can publish in newspapers and articles, et cetera, but we probably could give a lot more credibility to the online community if more professionals were involved with that. And I just wanted to know if there was an apprehension as a professional to be out there.
Well, I think I mentioned that the only reason I see myself as a stealth person on this big group in Houston is that I want parents to be able to have free dialogue about the place where I work. I think this kind of venting and sharing experiences of clinical providers is really important for families to be able to do this. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to stay out of it, unless I see something like I mentioned about this 19-month-old who went off insulin. If I see something that's dangerous, then I act, but I don't worry about liability, but probably because I'm a psychologist, maybe as much as Jeremy would.
Yeah, I haven't ever gone on like a blog and identified myself as a physician and given information in a physician-type setting. That would be scary to me, because I think, I would only do that in a clinical setting and knowing the patient, so I wouldn't ever do that. I have, in the kind of my patient side of things, gone onto blogs and de-identified myself or whatever, and I guess I don't have as much fear there, but I would say that absolutely, to answer your question, there's a fear of healthcare professionals going on and certainly identifying themselves as healthcare professionals, giving information out into the ethers.
We had Jim.
So back to the kind of ADA stamp of approval, that idea. You know how everyone can kind of just recite textbook hypoglycemic treatment, right? 15 grams, 15 minutes, that kind of thing, right? They don't say eat grapes, or they don't say eat this, they say 15 grams of carbohydrate. I think there needs to be a standard response that a healthcare professional can say when the social media question comes. Not necessarily, oh no, here's the 3, but ADA could maybe set the path to say, when this comes up, rather than say, don't believe anything here online. Because that's too easy. It's too easy to dismiss. And I hear doctors do it all the time. They don't have enough time to even contemplate. But more of a position that, if it has the honor code stamp, which I know CWD has, more of a guideline of this should be the response when the social media question comes. Not necessarily, here's our 3 approved sites. So is there a way to get there? I mean, is that the goal?
I think that's more likely to happen. I think that within some of the national committees of the ADA, I think that there could be a push to, for example, when they're writing the new practice guidelines, to insert language about when questions come up about social media, these are some recommendations about how you could respond to that. I think that's likely, that is a likely scenario.
Because the victory is the patient wants to know more.
Right.
Right? I mean, that's hurdle number 1. They're actually actively going, I want to know more.
Yeah.
So you congratulate them, say, you should always want to know more. However,
I think it's just going to take a change in mindset, because I think right now healthcare practitioners view this kind of online thing as not medicine. It's not us to deal with. And I think that's kind of an outdated way of thinking, and we need to embrace this idea, like, it's here to stay. So yeah, what should be the response? And I think that's, to the stamp of approval, some of this can happen kind of informally by just, putting somebody else's link on your page. So CWD has a link to a different blog. It's kind of CWD's stamp of approval. Or if JDRF has a link, to certain areas, that's kind of like an informal stamp of approval. So that kind of stuff is already happening. But I like the idea that just having the ADA or say something about, making a comment or a position statement or something wouldn't be that difficult, and at least start opening people's eyes to this is something that we need to kind of think of in our clinical repertoire of techniques we have to treat our patients.
But I think it's also not just social media. I mean, just like as human beings, we don't believe everything we read in the newspaper. We don't believe everything we hear in the news. We don't believe everything we read on the internet. I hope we don't believe everything. We shouldn't believe. We should always have sort of a sense of where is the information coming from, what's the angle of the person that's reporting or writing it, right? So we have to be good consumers of information, whether it's medical or anything else. So I don't think that it's only a question of valid information from a social media site. I think no matter what, we should always have a little bit of questioning about what we read or hear.
The question about research, though, is a very good one, because if you think about 1990, that was kind of a turning point in terms of understanding the real power of family support in terms of outcomes for children, both health outcomes.
That was Barbara's research, I just want to say.
Health outcomes.
It was Barbara's research.
I am 80 years old, and I think you still. But it really, there was a turning point. I mean, that sounds like no big news now. Families are important, but that was not the standard of practice in 1990. That wasn't. And so I think, Jim, when I hear what you're suggesting and Korey's response about making it part of practice guidelines, that we have enough, we know now enough about support. And I don't think we need to do a randomized clinical trial to talk about support as a predictor of outcomes. I think we could take any research study and look at people who try to measure their activity online, and how does that relate to some of their quality of life or glycemic outcomes or things like that. I think that we could look at support we could look at research models that looked at family support, just like the first studies of family support weren't randomized controlled trials. They were studies looking at correlations, associations between family functioning, good family functioning, and family conflict, showing, and then we had this incredible steamroller of study after study after study between 1990 for the last 33 years, studies showing the power of family support. I think that, maybe one of the things that I think Carrie and Bennett and Adam and Kelly are doing is starting that next new, I think, kind of like tsunami of appreciating what support from the internet can mean.
Thank you. We had a... Scott.
Hi. You've mentioned a couple times about there being a difference between the instrumental support about how you do things and then the emotional support. And also have mentioned a couple times that support helps people have better outcomes. My question is, does it really matter where that support is coming from? What makes social media a different thing that requires a completely new look at it?
Well, to me, you'd have to take it in context. I mean, there's so many people in Texas, the state I come from, that are miles and miles and miles away from another family that is living with type 1 diabetes. So there's so much of Texas is rural and people are isolated. And so if you're isolated in a little community in West Texas and you're isolated with having type 1 diabetes, that's double isolation. So these people are going to be more engaging.
That's the tool they're using.
That's right.
To get the tool. Mm-hmm. But what's the difference between the support they're getting there and the support they're getting from an in-person support group?
I think that's a good empirical question. I can't answer that. I was thinking more of the person who doesn't have the opportunity for the in the face-to-face support group. I can tell you again, this online community, they have founded some, because Houston is such a big spread out place, they founded some little play groups of parents who live in Sugar Land, parents who live in the Woodlands, parents who live in Cy-Fair. And they have little groups so people are wanting that, even people who meet on the online community. But which is better, I couldn't say.
And it's a bit of I think, a false dichotomy. It either is in person or it is online, and there's something qualitatively different about that. I mean, I think that it's because the reason that there's not acceptance of support generally, no matter which form it comes in, is that we're kind of conservative and skeptical about things that are new, and about what we know is that if in-person support works, and we're just now learning that that virtual support can be equally effective. And so I think it's just that we're just slow to progress to the point where we accept that. So I think it is the same, and I don't think that one is necessarily better than the other. If someone can't get out of their house and the only support they can get is virtual, they should absolutely do that. So I think it's just we're slow on the uptake.
Yeah, I would just say, from thinking of it a practitioner standpoint, for type 2 diabetes, for example, we have a ton of different drugs that lower patients' A1Cs. So they all get to a similar result, but they all have different side effects and different safety profiles. So you want to make sure that if you're getting to the same result, you're doing it safely and in a way that you're familiar with and comfortable with. So, getting the end result is one thing, but then just being comfortable with how it's done and making sure it's done in a safe, productive way, I guess.
So we have a whole bunch of questions out here in the audience. You can see us waving our hands, trying to keep traffic. I think, is that Lane back there? Hi, Lane.
Good morning, everyone. I have a question about technology. Nilofer Merchant argues that we're now in an era of the social era. So to talk about social media is a limiting. She asserts that social is much more than just media. And I'd like to ask you a question about social technology development and whether, and we see this on some of the sites where there's now people who are contributing to these sites in a technology vector. So my question is, should we be adding things like GitHub and SourceForge and some of these software development social sites to the pantheon of Twitter and blogs?
Yes. That's the extent of my knowledge on that topic. So.
I'll just give a quick example. I heard a talk from an endocrinologist in the Netherlands who has done some incredible work around his insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring, and much of the contribution was socially through the 800 people in his practice and the parents and caregivers and interested parties who were contributing socially to his technology development. So things like ePatient, Dave, and Tidepool, and some of these new sites which are coming on which are particularly technology focused.
So I'm going to jump in with that since it's a sort of a social media question, and I think that there's a movement towards quantified self and sites that are supportive of people that are in that movement. I know that a few of those people were at Amy Tendridge's summit in November, and it was fascinating to me, and I will concede that, like when I listen to you talk, I'm somewhat amazed that I understand anything that's said. But I think that's definitely a new trend in social media, and one that's going to be even more challenging than just social support as, you know, how are we analyzing, you know, the quantified data that we're taking out of ourselves. Yeah. So, great question, and I'm going with yes. Well, I think Kelly had the next question.
Well, I was just going to say that I completely agree. Like I was saying with this technology and diabetes in general, I think is so outdated. Just patients coming in and having their different meters with the cables and downloading information that may not work, and then the pumps and the CGMs. You know, we're moving quickly towards getting all this information into the cloud, and not just your glucose data, but all of your healthcare information, and having that easily transferable to patients, to healthcare providers, and then where does that go socially? You know, so I think we should be moving quickly in that direction, because diabetes is way behind in this technology kind of space, I think.
Dr. Stephen Ponder gave a talk at the recent ADA about a good example of what you're talking about. So Corey's right with yes.
I'm not right?
You're right, too.
Okay.
Hi. And I'm kind of more into what Scott said back there about support, online versus off. A lot of facilities don't have the money for online or offline support anymore. Not, you know, they can't afford to have someone hold a meeting. And I know that happened at my own hospital years ago. I went to a pump support group meeting, and it was a teaching hospital. It's great. And they stopped doing it because, you know, they couldn't afford to. Couldn't afford to staff it. So finding that support online, you know, was critical and huge. So I think support is support. And I think both are really important. And taking online off is amazing, as we all know. But like you said, if someone is in a very isolated area, if they can log on and just say, I'm having a really bad night, you know, my blood sugars are really high, people stay with them online to make sure they're okay, and stay with them as their numbers go down, and that's huge. So there's got to be room for both. So that's it.
Thanks, Kelly. I think we had, thank you.
I had a comment about the difference between online support and face-to-face, and a lot of teens especially, and I'm sure aware of this now, are more comfortable sharing things they might not otherwise online. They feel a little more anonymous, a little more open, and it might actually, for some of them, be more effective in that sense.
I think the only issue with teens, one among the many issues with teens, but with regard to what you're talking about, is that I think that they don't have the same kind of consistent patterns of use of these different forums as adults do. And so it's a little bit harder to figure out what they get out of it. I think that it's easier with the adults to understand kind of the difference between online and face-to-face support. But it's hard because they're on so many different sites and doing so many different things that it's a little bit hard to track what they're getting out of it. And if you look at some of the forums that have been set up, you know, children with diabetes, ADAs, and JDRF's programs, the teen boards don't get used very much. The teen forums don't get used. They connect with people, and then diabetes comes later. They don't usually seek a diabetes connection first. So it's different than what adults do. It's a whole different animal.
This online, offline, I find very interesting in the fact that this very conference with over 3,000 people started as an offline. it started as an online. It started as an online discussion. People got together, and it grew into people wanting to meet face to face. Brandy Barnes and Diabetes Sisters, same thing. Started online. Manny's now Manny Hernandez is working in getting people to meet. So I think it's a complement of both, that you start in one area and the desire to actually have that face-to-face and then continue back to online to stay, and the word here is connection that we're looking for, to keep that connection all year round is just crucial. So I think it's a complement of not either or, but both.
Well, and this is like, the online, the daily support that you might get is, the basal insulin. And then, you come to a conference like this and you get a huge bolus of support. And, I feel that way. And so that's why I'm here.
Okay, that earns you a drink when I'm buying drinks later, too. That was nice of you.
I was trying to figure out how to fit Monster in.
I know. That would have got you a Monster drink.
So Jill said Monster, so she should at least get half a drink for saying Monster.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd jump in here with a question that I've been thinking about, and that is, with changes in healthcare reimbursement and a movement towards outcome-based reimbursement schemes, with just as tight schedules as ever, do you think that the view of suggesting that patients find support in either online communities or offline communities is going to increase as a way of boosting outcomes without increasing office time visits?
I sure hope not. I hope that people don't think, I have to do less work to take care of my patients because I can send them to some social media site where they're going to get their emotional support. I would not want to have any of my family see a healthcare professional that thought that way. That would be, I think that would be awful. I would want people to still, I don't know what else to say. I just think that would be awful.
I think the assumption that medical providers would think that support was important. I wish you were right, but I think that still most medical providers think what's important is my algorithm that I'm giving you or my prescription that I'm giving you, not the reality that it's the support. If we had in practice guidelines, if we had things about family conflict in the ADA practice guidelines, that would be fabulous. Because if clinicians want to have a lightning rod up for something that's going to predict poor outcomes, it would be family conflict. And we don't have that written in our... So I don't think we're going to get physicians that are recognizing the value of... And I don't mean to pick on physicians. I mean any of us.
It's okay to pick on physicians.
I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. As a blogger and a mother of a child with diabetes, I often struggle with how much of our life to share, and that she's going to grow up and as she becomes an adult go, oh my gosh, all of this is out there about me. And she was young when she was diagnosed. She was only 12 months old, so I've been doing this for about 5 years. And I'm starting to come to a point in my life where I'm like, I don't know if I should continue to share so much of our life or if I should hold back. And so I don't know if you have any insights about that.
What a thoughtful mother. I think that's good for you for looking ahead, looking at the long term. I think responding with an anonymous, I know we encourage that in the group that I'm part of, that I wouldn't identify myself as Barbara Anderson with a daughter, Sarah, who has diabetes. I would identify myself as, JB or something like that, my initials mixed up, with a 5-year-old. And so I would recommend being anonymous. But maybe that doesn't allow you connections then. So you may see some value in being more open and identifying yourself. So it's a really personal decision, and good for you for being thoughtful about it.
And maybe it's just, it's having periodic discussions about, when she's, I don't know how old she is now, but when she's 13 or 14, she's probably not going to want all this information out there. And so it may be that you have to adjust over time, and the only way you can know to do that is by having conversations and being thoughtful like you already are. But it's also the case, I think, that it's a whole different generation where this is acceptable. to have this information out there. And so if she's able to be part of that process and say, yeah, this is fine, then it's okay.
And I'd add that there's a certain nuance to understanding health communications through social media that needs to take place, and that is that, like you, I'm the parent of 2 teens with type 1 diabetes, and I'm very selective about what I write about them because of their privacy, and that has an effect, I think, of creating sort of a Pollyanna-like environment at times where what we report are successes and not struggles. And it's really difficult to figure out how to talk about those struggles in a way that respects your kid's privacy. And until you can figure out how to do that, you don't write about it. And that portion of the difficulty of living with type 1 diabetes is under-communicated because of the very legitimate issue that you talk about. I think so, at least.
And I think that a 10-year-old's conception of forever and what they feel comfortable with sharing, and a 14-year-old's conception of forever, and then a 25-year-old's conception are fundamentally different. And you always, I think, have to think about, so at my age now, parent, if my parents had given all of that information in detail about me as I was growing up, now as a grown-up, would I be okay with my employer accessing it, with the people I'm dating, with the people I'm friends with my new business partner? And I'm guessing the answer would be no. And so I think that's really where so I would actually respectfully disagree with you, Korey. I've never done that before. I've never disagreed with you before. Isn't that crazy?
Respectfully.
And respectfully.
Respectfully was the part that you'd never done.
No, anyway, I would not ask your child if they're comfortable, because I don't think that they're at the cognitive or emotional level where they can actually see into the future and make a response that they'll feel comfortable with forever. So I would always err on the side of saying almost nothing about your child after they're probably about 5 or 6 years of age. Like, you can threaten them with the naked baby pictures in the bathtub for when you go to prom. I'm going to show your boyfriend this naked baby picture, and you can tell them that, but you actually probably don't show the prom date. But, that's from when they were babies. So that's information that sort of is socially okay to share. But as they get older, I would be much more cautious about privacy. I would always err on the side of caution.
So as the teen program coordinator for children with diabetes, I think that we have to remember in this social media context, the parent has diabetes, but they have the child's diabetes, right? And then the teenager has diabetes. And just like we've been working together forever, I think that we have to remember that the parent blogging about the child still has it, right? So we have to be really careful about your process of blogging and healing and dealing with your emotions and where your child is going to end up in this. And that is, you can't feel better if you're going to make your child feel worse.
Absolutely.
And that's a huge jump right there. We have to make sure we're working together as a team when you're dealing with, as a parent blogger of a child, that your children are primary. Your children are first, so if you decide to write something or not, it's going to depend on where is this going to make, and you do a very good job of that, Bennett, of just sort of stopping and saying, I can't say this right now. This is my son's struggle, this is my daughter's struggle, but I'm not going to put it online. Even if it would help heal.
Right, and I think that what's valuable is that, and we've known each other forever, you build relationship with people that you know forever, and you can go to them offline quietly in 6 seconds and say, I'm experiencing this problem, get a massive amount of empathy and a quick shot of support, but that's all private. And it is critically important, and it's why I come here every year. I think you had... Mary had one?
Hi. I respectfully disagree. It's imperative that the parents get that information out there too. Because as parents, we take it all more personally. Well, I don't want to say we're more personally. I'm not comparing. But we take it super personally, everything. So for somebody to say, wow, they're going through that too. But at the same time, I think most of the parent bloggers always think of our children first and always think of them looking back at what we're writing. So well, I know I am really careful about it, but what my way of getting around it is not using my children's names. And that way, nobody can Google their name when they're a teenager or whatever and find them online. So that's how I get around it. I don't know if you think that's a successful way or not.
I think that making things more generic, has anybody had this experience with a child of this age? Makes a lot of sense, and you can get a lot of feedback that way. But I think if you're going to blog, and it's your blog, which means somebody can always, if you're writing about your family, they're going to connect it to your child, whether you put your child's name out there or not.
Right.
But if it's not your blog writing about your family, and you're writing instead about experiences and questions, then it's more of a generic, has anybody had this experience, or I'm having this experience.
So
that's
not
fine.
sharing personal stories that's like an opposite of a blog. Like, as a blogger, I need to share those stories. But at the same time, I think we always try to do it gently and not anything. We don't point fingers at our children ever. We don't use a lot of specifics. And in our community, I see everybody being really careful. And we mostly talk about our emotions. But the stories have to be shared. It's imperative. And it's changed my life by reading everybody's story, and that's what blogging is.
Well, and I think
it's telling our story.
I think that if I heard Natalie's point, one of the things that she was trying to say was that, it's separating out whether this is an issue with trying to parent versus your own issues, your own emotional struggles with being a parent of a child with diabetes, and it's hard to separate those things out, and so. I think we're talking about two different issues. We're talking about privacy and boundaries, and then we're talking about how you deal with your own emotions around diabetes and being a parent, and the struggles that your kid is having. And so I think that it's a complicated. If it was easy, we would have finished this,
I agree,
a couple minutes.
It's complicated, but it can be done.
I think absolutely,
Yeah.
and I think that and from what I've read, I think that everything I've read, people do it really well.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I wanted to say, is the general feel around the parent community that I participate in. Everybody's really careful.
Yeah.
And like Joanne is, we are always thinking about the kids. We're always thinking about people looking back and them reading it again and things of that nature. But at the same time, the story has to be shared.
Bringing it back to sort of a 50,000-foot view, I think like all of us in the room are just so admire so much what CWD does and social media in general and the benefits of it. But I sort of keep coming back to this, what I think is the million-dollar question: how do we get more patients and more providers online? And I feel like I kind of made a list of a lot of the barriers, like. Is it that it's not on the guidelines, it's not endorsed by societies, it's not in education, sites aren't perceived as trustworthy, sites aren't moderated, some patients don't want to be online and talk about diabetes, physicians don't know about it, patients don't know about it. I would love to hear, what do you think is the biggest barrier, and how can we kind of get more people online?
I'd still go with time. I think time. This is really new. Now, it's not new to people in this. Some of you have been doing this 4 or 5 years. Carrie's practically a dinosaur. She was, like a pioneer. That's better than a dinosaur.
Pioneer is better.
Dinosaur pioneer.
Yeah, exactly.
Under the bed with the monsters.
But I think, Adam, it's about time. I'm not sure you can get everybody to the same place at the same time just because of individual differences. And that goes for families as well as clinicians.
But we have to remember that this is being broadcast and a lot of people are watching it. So if there's something, like some insight that you can provide right now, you are reaching many people who might be a little nervous, have some trepidation. How can you encourage them to make the leap that you guys seem so comfortable in having already made?
Get online and look. Just explore. Just take a half hour of your day and just look at different sites. And then another day, take a half hour and look at different sites. And just check it out. And it's way less scary, as are almost everything that we're afraid of, right? When you actually experience, you're like, oh, it wasn't so bad.
Under the bed. I mean, that's...
You're buying a lot of drinks tonight.
You know, actually, one of my very favorite children's books is There's a Nightmare in My Closet by Mercer Mayer. If you have a preschooler, you must own this book. And this kid is afraid of the monster in his closet, so he waits with his little flashlight and his little, like, pop gun. And then when he knows that the monster's in there, when the lights are all out, he opens the closet. And the monster is really scared of him, so cries, because he was found. And so he has to comfort the monster and put him in his bed and tell him, don't wake up Mom and Dad. You know, but it's great. It's about facing your fears, right? And so I think we should do that as grown-ups, too. So just open the internet, open the computer and look.
Yeah. Jill, are you expecting more patients to do that, more physicians, medical professionals to do that, all?
To read the book or to open a computer? Both. Yeah, sure. Why not? Why? I mean, what are we afraid of? I mean, we're almost always afraid of the things we don't know. Well, and they're almost always less scary once we actually face them. So I think that's true in life. I think it's true here. This was gazillions of years ago, there were some sort of mediated online chats, and I started to get really interested in, and I would like spend hours trying to respond to parents until my husband said, really, are you going to spend all of your time doing this? You can't help everybody. And I had to take a step back. Things are much better now. They really are. It's much less fear and misinformation. It's much more support than it used to be a long time ago.
Well, and I think that you're hitting on a couple points, and Jill as well. And to Adam's question, I think that it's a two-pronged approach. It's thinking about the providers and how we can get them to the point where they're more comfortable making recommendations about what's available, and then getting directly to the people that you want to serve. And it's two different things. And I think, I do work in changing patient behavior because that's easier than changing provider behavior. So I think there are some pursuits that are helpful on the provider standpoint, but you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck in looking for ways to draw more people into the online community, because that's the people that you're serving, and
And an empowered group of patients will change providers' behavior.
Absolutely.
So maybe you all could recommend to some of your thousands of people that follow you, share this with your provider. If this is at all helpful to you, let your nurse practitioner know. Tell your psychologist you really got a lot of help from Six and Tell Me.
I do think everyone in the diabetes online community can't stop talking about the diabetes online community to our healthcare providers. It really has changed our lives for the better. We'll talk about it. The person we're sitting next to, like the line of coffee. We'll definitely talk about it tomorrow.
That's good. That's great.
And speaking of talking about it, we'll have time for one last question, and then we'll let you guys make any closing comments you want to make, and then we'll let Manny wrap up. So,
hi, I don't want to take any kind of awareness away of Adam's question at all, but I did want to go to a little bit more of a specific question. So with CDN, I work a lot with young adults, and so a lot of our young adults are getting ready to transition between pediatric and adult care, or in the midst of it, or just have. And as more and more focus and research is being done on that transition, what role do you see social media playing in that, and how can providers embrace social media to help through that transition?
It's a tough question. I mean, because as you know, it's a very tough patient population group, and this is the kids that we lose, when they go off to college, and there's this void that they kind of go into. And a lot of times they don't have providers. So if, I don't know specifically, but something that can help fill that gap, to keep patients aware of their diabetes and tuned to it, communicating in some degree, that it increases their adherence or compliance to seeking out health care, I would guess. But
20 years ago, we didn't have the College with Diabetes Network, which is such a fabulous vehicle to help kids get through the rocky time of transition. I was just thinking, when you said about college, back in the dark ages, when I was on the faculty at the University of Michigan, I wanted to start a support group for college kids with diabetes. I thought, okay, there's 60,000 kids on this campus. There's some with type 1 diabetes. Went to no way. People were so afraid. I couldn't put a sign up in the diabetes clinic. I couldn't put a sign up in the college infirmary. The university wanted no part of it. And now that you think there's this college diabetes network that's online, and it's fabulous. So that's really come a long way.
Good chapter there.
Good, yes. Yay.
From a provider perspective, as guidelines are coming out to help providers transition their patients, do you see them engaging with social media in any way to help fill that gap that CDN doesn't, that we're not able to do on campus, but to help prepare for that transition to a new provider?
I think that providers that are aware of social media and are comfortable with the organic nature of it and what it provides are going to recommend that not to families throughout the lifespan, including during the transition years, and those that are afraid and hesitant are not. So I don't think it's just about transition.
I think, to your question and Adam's question of, what do we do to get providers using this more, I think it'll just require a change in mindset of viewing social media as another tool. We concentrate on using the insulin or the pumps or the CGMs, and we don't really think of this as another way of helping our patients reach their A1C goals or whatever it is. So, as we all know, that diabetes is a very psychosocial disease, and we have a lot of tools to help people get there, but there's a big disparity between what we can do and what actually happens, and that's kind of where I see social media and this online support kind of fitting in, is taking what the providers can do and then adding the support element to actually make sure that they kind of get done. So that's kind of what I see. The big picture is just thinking of this as another way of reaching treatment goals.
That couldn't possibly have been a better transition to wrapping up. So, Manny, can we pass Manny the microphone in a very dignified manner?
With respect.
Is that good? That works? All right. Well, Manny Hernandez from Diabetes Hands Foundation. We started one of these monsters under the bed with 2 diabetes back in 2007. So first off, I'd like to ask the audience here to please give an amazing round of applause to this. So I'm tasked with a very easy homework to wrap this up, because we had a very unengaged audience and panel and Twitter feed at P4DC. We even trended, as some of you noted, and folks joined from as far as the UK. So hello, you guys. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to just go and pick and choose a few what I felt were pearls, which there were a ton of, to try and put it all together and bring it home. We started talking about monster under the bed, concern over quality of information, that patients are exposed to and their families and through social media, versus, as Jill put it, the value of community that you can't get at your doctor, right? That 0.1% of the time in a year that you spend in the company of a medical professional. It was pointed out numerous times social media adoption is happening, but still some healthcare providers fear about their patients and what crazy things they're going to come back with after camp or CWD, God forbid, a pump. There was a great discussion, I think, that revolved around the top features that healthcare providers would want to see in order to feel comfortable recommended social media. I think there was consistency across the board with the importance of moderation, monitoring of sites, and interestingly enough, I think there was a reinforcement of the notion that it is on the community, to become a self-police person. Man, woman. Jill also pointed out she does not like, and neither do any one of us who is active on the DOC, to see snake oil ads. So, I think that's a very important thing to reinforce. The value of social media so that we can get healthcare provider acceptance. Jeremy pointed out social media is here to stay. The question is how to use it safely and effectively. And Jill pointed out, and I think this is something we've all scratched our heads without having the research mind that you have, that it is very, very hard to run a randomized controlled trial to prove the value of social media. And Korey reinforced that for acceptance from the scientific community, we do need that study, but I think he brought up a really interesting question. You don't have to seek for that acceptance. So a very valid point for further thought. In terms of support, the big theme, the big running theme of what we are exposed to and the benefit we get from the DOC and social media, it is, we know, a predictor of outcomes. And the 1990s, as Barbara pointed out, was that turning point where family support was found to have a definite impact in our outcomes. And Korey then pointed out that virtual support seems to have just as good an impact. And again, another a tweetable moment. Online is basal, offline is a huge bolus. So we're hopefully going to not go too low in the course of the next 4 days. So stamps of approval, there was discussion about that too. Barbara quite rightly pointed out that those can hardly keep up with the pace of change and rapid pace of evolution in social media. But it does seem that some kind of a general social media guideline to incorporate into ADA guidelines or may come in handy to facilitate the adoption and the recommendation process among healthcare professionals. And there was mention as well about the HON code as one of those possible vehicles to facilitate the process. Not too long ago, we had a very rich exchange surrounding privacy concerns, where there were some very intense and heartfelt and passionate feelings on both sides, from the parent and patient side, as well as from those in the panel. And in response to Adam's super question, what do you think is the biggest barrier? Barbara reinforcing again, time. This is really new to patients and healthcare providers. And to bring this point home, remember the stat that Kelly started with, at 2-point-something million people on Facebook. That's tiny, compared to the 400 million people with diabetes in the world. So we still have a long ways to go. Jill said, get online, look at different sites, both patients and healthcare providers. It's less scary than it seems. And I'd love to get the title of that book from you. I think it can come in handy as well. And Korey said, get physicians more comfortable to make recommendations. Changing patient behavior is easier than changing provider behavior. It was really hard to do this because there was so much amazing discussion today and so many great questions and so many amazing tweets. But what I hope is that today's discussion is just the start of an ongoing process to help us get more people involved and benefiting from what we know are the great benefits that come from those online and then IRL in real life connections. I was pointing out that after 6 years, I know that guy with the beard there, strangely T1, and I had never met him in person. I had goosebumps when I heard his voice in the room. So that's a power. That's a power that this has, and he's taught me a lot, and hopefully I've been able to teach him some over the course of the past 6 years. Two last points before we wrap it up. There's a running tweet from a mom of two type T1s that is participating in a clinical trial, and she is in need of at least 10 Bayer contour strips. So if any of you have one, tweet back at her and try to coordinate, meeting up. I don't have a Bayer meter, but if you do, please get in touch with her. Let's keep the conversation going. The hashtag is #P4DC, and thank you very much, those of you here, those in the panel, and everyone here and everyone online for joining us today. Thank you.